What happens when passion turns deadly? When love becomes an obsession too dangerous to control? Travis Alexander and Jodi Arias seem like any other couple fueled by desire, lust, and a whirlwind romance that spanned years. But beneath the surface, their relationship was anything but ordinary. It was toxic, filled with manipulation, jealousy, and a desperate need for control. When Travis tried to move on, Jodi's love turned into something far more sinister. In 2008, it all came to a bloody end. How does a lover become a killer? And what drives someone to commit murder in the name of love? Travis Alexander was the epitome of success and charm. A motivational speaker with a thriving career, he had a magnetic presence that captivated audiences wherever he went. Charismatic and driven, he exuded confidence and ambition, constantly aiming higher in his life and career. At 30, Travis had worked his way up from a difficult childhood into a life of opportunity. He had a tight-knit circle of friends, a love for adventure, and deep faith guiding his path. To many, Travis seemed like the ideal bachelor, successful, handsome, and unattainable. Jodi Arias was a striking woman with an undeniable allure. At 26, she was artistic, mysterious, and radiated a sensuality that often turned heads. Raised in a small town in California, Jodi was searching for something more, something bigger than the quiet life she knew. She had a passion for photography and a longing to break away from the mundane. When she met Travis, she was at a crossroads, torn between her dreams and the reality of her life. Jodi was intense, with a depth of emotion that could pull anyone into her orbit. But beneath her beauty and charm lay a hunger for validation, love, and control. It was February 2006 when Travis first laid eyes on Jodi Arias at a business conference in Las Vegas. The room buzzed with energy as Travis delivered a powerful speech to a captivated audience. His words were inspiring, his confidence unshakable, and his smile infectious. Jodi, sitting in the crowd, couldn't take her eyes off him. As his speech concluded and the applause echoed through the room, their eyes met. It was a fleeting moment, but for Jodi, it felt like fate. Later that evening, Travis was mingling with fellow speakers and attendees at a cocktail reception. Among the sea of faces, there she was, Jodi, standing by the bar, her eyes never straying far from him. She was dressed in a form-fitting black dress that accentuated her curves, her long blonde hair cascading down her back. Their attraction was magnetic, undeniable. "Hi, I'm Travis," he said, approaching her with that same confident smile he had flashed to the audience earlier. "I know," Jodi replied, her voice soft yet sultry. "I was in the crowd. You were inspiring." The flirtation was immediate, with playful banter flowing effortlessly between them. Travis was captivated by her beauty, but there was something else, a mysterious energy about her that intrigued him. Jodi, for her part, was completely taken with Travis's success, his ambition, and the way he commanded attention without even trying. As the night wore on, they found themselves pulled closer, lost in deep conversation as if no one else in the room existed. Jodi talked about her love for photography, while Travis shared stories about his journey to becoming a successful speaker. They laughed, flirted, and before long, their hands brushed, sending an electric current between them. Despite living in different states, Travis in Arizona and Jodi in California, their connection was undeniable. After the conference, Travis couldn't stop thinking about her. He found himself checking his phone, hoping for a message, a call, anything from her. And soon enough, his phone buzzed with a message from Jodi: "I can't stop thinking about you." It wasn't long before their casual texts turned into long, late-night phone calls. They would talk for hours, sharing their dreams, their fears, their desires. The conversation would start innocent enough, but as the night deepened, so did their intimacy. Jodi would describe the way she missed his touch, how she longed to see him again, while Travis would fantasize aloud about what he would do when they were finally together again. Their words became seductive, teasing, and full of the unspoken passion between them. It was during one of these phone calls that Jodi whispered, "I need to see you, Travis. I don't care where or when, I just need to feel you close." A few weeks later, Jodi made her way to Arizona for a spontaneous visit. When she arrived at Travis's home, the anticipation was almost unbearable. As she stood at his door, her heart raced. When Travis opened the door, the look in his eyes said it all. He had been waiting for her just as eagerly. Their reunion was electric. As soon as the door closed, Travis pulled her into his arms, their lips colliding in a heated kiss. The world outside ceased to exist as they lost themselves in each other. The kiss deepened, becoming hungrier, more desperate. Travis's hands roamed her body, while Jodi's fingers tangled in his hair. The tension that had been building over their phone calls now exploded into physical passion. In the privacy of his bedroom, their clothes were discarded with hurried hands, and soon they were tangled in the sheets, lost in each other's bodies. Their chemistry was undeniable, their desire insatiable. Every kiss, every touch was a reminder of the fiery connection they shared. For Travis, their relationship was passionate but uncomplicated. He enjoyed the intensity of their connection, the way Jodi looked at him, touched him, and made him feel desired. But for Jodi, it was becoming more. She was falling for him hard. Each time they met, she could feel herself getting pulled deeper into his world, into his life, and she couldn't bear the thought of losing him. They continued to meet in secret, Jodi traveling back and forth from California to Arizona, for weekend visits filled with lust and stolen moments. But as their affair intensified, so did the cracks in their relationship. Jody wanted more time, more commitment, more of Travis's attention. But Travis, who valued his independence and was already seeing other women, began to feel the pressure. Jody's intensity started to border on obsession. She would call him at all hours, send him countless texts, and even show up unannounced. Travis, once flattered by her attention, now found himself growing wary of the depth of her feelings. But the heat between them, the allure of their passionate encounters, kept him coming back. Though they were drawn to each other, their expectations for the relationship couldn't have been more different. Travis, while charmed by Jody, never saw her as his future wife. Jody, however, envisioned a life where she was the center of Travis's world. The initial sparks of passion that had pulled them together were now beginning to show the darker side of their affair. The more Jody clung to Travis, the more distant he became. And though they continued to share heated nights together, the tension between them was growing. By the end of 2006, their once unbreakable connection had begun to fracture, setting the stage for the intense and tragic events that would soon follow. By 2007, the passion that once defined Travis and Jody's relationship had transformed into something far more volatile. The nights of sensual kisses and heated touches continued, but they were now tainted by an underlying darkness: Jody's growing obsession. What began as an exciting affair filled with thrilling moments of stolen desire was slowly devolving into a dangerous power struggle. Jody wanted more from Travis's attention, his love, his commitment, but Travis, feeling suffocated by her intensity, started to emotionally withdraw. Despite the growing tension, they were still drawn to each other like moths to a flame. The physical chemistry between them was undeniable, and Jody clung to that, hoping that the passion in the bedroom would be enough to keep them together. In a desperate bid to be closer to Travis, Jody made the decision to move from California to Arizona. She rationalized it as a new chapter in her life, but deep down, it was a move fueled by her desire to be near him, to integrate herself into his world, and perhaps to rekindle the emotional connection they had lost. When she told Travis about her move, his reaction was lukewarm at best. While he welcomed the idea of seeing her more often, the thought of her being so close, so available, unnerved him. He had already started to see Jody less as a potential life partner and more as a complication, someone whose feelings ran deeper than his own. Still, the allure of their physical connection kept Travis in the relationship. Despite his reservations, every time Jody was near, the tension between them would escalate, leading to inevitable moments of passion. One evening, shortly after Jody had settled into her new home in Arizona, she showed up at Travis's house unannounced. It wasn't the first time she had done so, but this time, there was something different in the air. Travis was irritated at first, frustrated by her lack of boundaries, but as soon as she stepped inside, all of that frustration melted away. Jody was wearing a thin silk robe, her hair tousled as if she had just stepped out of a dream. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The look in her eyes was enough, fiery, filled with desire, and tinged with desperation. Travis felt a familiar pull in his chest, a mix of lust and longing. He knew this was a bad idea, but when Jody reached out, touching his arm with feather-light fingers, he couldn't resist. The tension between them was palpable as they stood in the dimly lit hallway. Jody closed the space between them, her lips hovering just inches from his, teasing him. "I've missed you," she whispered, her breath warm against his skin. Travis exhaled sharply, his hand reaching up to caress the back of her neck. He pulled her closer, their lips finally crashing together in a kiss that was both fiery and frantic, as though they were trying to drown out all the things they didn't want to say. Jody pressed her body against his, her hands roaming over his chest, sliding under his shirt with practiced ease. Travis groaned as her fingers traced the lines of his muscles, his own hand slipping beneath the silk of her robe. The softness of her skin, the heat between them, it was intoxicating. Their kisses grew more intense, more demanding, as they stumbled towards the bedroom, shedding clothes along the way. Once inside, they collapsed onto the bed, their bodies tangling together in a feverish frenzy. Jody's hands moved with urgency, her nails grazing his back as she pulled him closer, needing to feel him, to claim him. Every touch, every kiss, was a desperate attempt to hold on to the connection she feared was slipping away. Travis responded with equal intensity, his hands gripping her hips, his lips trailing along her neck, his breath hot against her skin. Their bodies moved in rhythm, driven by a mix of passion and frustration, as if they were trying to lose themselves in the physicality of it all, to forget the growing emotional chasm between them. For a moment, it worked. The heat, the chemistry, the primal need, they drowned in it. But as the sweat cooled and their breathing slowed, the reality of their situation began to creep back in. After their feverish encounter, Jody lay beside Travis, her head resting on his chest. But as his breathing evened out, signaling that he was drifting off to sleep, her mind raced. The euphoria of their lovemaking was short-lived, replaced by the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Travis wasn't hers, not completely, and it terrified her. Her gaze drifted to his phone, lying on the nightstand. A wave of paranoia washed over her, and before she could stop herself, she reached for it. Unlocking the phone was easy, she knew his passcode. What she found inside made her stomach drop. There were texts, flirty, suggestive messages from another woman, a woman who wasn't her. Jody's heart pounded in her chest as she scrolled through the messages. The woman wasn't just a casual fling, she was someone Travis was clearly interested in. Someone he was seeing while still sleeping with Jody. The jealousy that had been simmering beneath the surface exploded into full-blown rage. Jody slipped out of bed, clutching the phone in her hand, her body shaking with anger. She felt sick, humiliated, and betrayed. How could Travis do this to her? After everything they had shared, after the nights of passion, the secrets, the promises, how could he still be pursuing someone else? When Travis woke up the next morning, he immediately knew something was wrong. Jody was sitting on the edge of the bed, her back rigid, her shoulders tense. His phone lay beside her. The screen still lit up. "Jody," he began, but she cut him off, her voice cold and sharp. "Who is she?" "Travis," she demanded, her eyes burning with a mix of hurt and fury. "Who is she? And why are you still seeing her while you're with me?" Travis ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling up inside him. "It's not what you think," he tried to explain, but Jody wasn't having it. She stood up, her fists clenched at her sides. "You promised me," she hissed, stepping closer to him. "You said I was the only one. You lied to me, Travis." He sighed, standing up to face her. "We've talked about this. Jody, I told you from the beginning that I wasn't looking for anything serious." "But this is serious," she cried, her voice breaking. "This is real for me, Travis. I moved here for you. I gave up everything for you." Travis could feel the weight of her words, the intensity of her feelings, but instead of softening, he felt trapped. He didn't want this. Didn't want the pressure, the commitment, the obsession. He had enjoyed their time together, the passion, the sex, the excitement, but now it was suffocating him. "Jody, I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore," he said quietly, his tone final. This isn't working." Jody's world shattered in that moment. She had given everything to Travis, her time, her body, her heart, and now he was walking away. The rejection cut deep, and the pain quickly morphed into something darker, more dangerous. She stormed out of his house, tears streaming down her face. But even as she left, the obsession only grew stronger. Jody couldn't let him go. She wouldn't. As she drove away, her mind raced with thoughts of revenge, of how she could make Travis pay for breaking her heart. The passion they once shared had turned into a twisted, dangerous obsession, and Jody was willing to do whatever it took to keep him, no matter the cost. This second episode captures the escalating toxicity of Travis and Jody's relationship, blending moments of intense physical passion with the simmering jealousy and obsession that would ultimately lead to tragedy. By the late months of 2007, Travis Alexander had made up his mind he needed to break free from Jody Arias. Their once passionate relationship had deteriorated into a toxic cycle of lust, arguments, and manipulation. Travis wanted out, but leaving wasn't as easy as he hoped. Jody refused to let go. She clung to their past, using the intense sexual connection they shared as her weapon to keep him tethered, even as Travis tried to move on with his life. Jody was no longer just a lover scorned, she was obsessed, determined to have Travis even if it meant spiraling deeper into a dark, emotional abyss. And despite his growing resentment, Travis still found himself drawn back into her web, torn between guilt, desire, and an overwhelming need to escape. One evening in early 2008, after weeks of trying to distance himself, Travis made the mistake of answering one of Jody's late-night calls. Her voice on the other end was soft, seductive, and laced with an air of vulnerability that had always been his weakness. "I miss you," Travis, Jody whispered, her tone dripping with longing. "I just want to see you, just one last time. We don't have to talk. Just be with me." Travis hesitated, knowing where this would lead. Every time he thought he was done with her, Jody would pull him back in with promises of simple affection, only for things to explode into something much darker. But guilt gnawed at him. He felt responsible for her pain, for the confusion he had left behind when their physical relationship had continued after their emotional one had ended. Against his better judgment, he agreed. When Travis arrived at Jody's place, she greeted him at the door wearing a thin, lace robe that left little to the imagination. Her hair was tousled, her lips painted in a deep shade of red. She looked irresistible, and she knew it. Without a word, she leaned in, brushing her lips against his cheek in a whisper of a kiss. Her fingers slid down his arm, igniting that familiar fire in him. No matter how much he tried to distance himself, his body betrayed him every time she was near. "Jody, we need to talk," Travis muttered, his voice thick with tension. He wanted to set boundaries, to make her understand that this was over. But as soon as the words left his mouth, she pressed her finger to his lips, silencing him. "We don't have to talk," she whispered, her lips now grazing his ear. "Just let me feel you, one last time." Before Travis could protest, Jody pulled him into her arms, her body warm and inviting. Her lips found his, kissing him with a slow, deliberate passion. And just as she always did, she found his weakness. His hands gripped her waist, pulling her closer despite the voice in his head screaming for him to stop. Their kiss deepened, becoming more desperate, more consuming. Travis could feel her nails dragging lightly down his back, her breath hot against his skin as she pulled him toward the bedroom. Every step forward felt like sinking deeper into quicksand. He was trapped, and he knew it, but he couldn't pull away. They fell onto the bed, a tangle of limbs, as their clothes disappeared between breathless kisses and heated touches. Jody's hands moved with a kind of possessive urgency, as if she could make him hers again through their physical connection alone. Travis's body responded, but his mind was elsewhere, conflicted, weighed down by the knowledge that this wasn't what he wanted anymore. Their encounter was intense, as it always was, but now there was something darker beneath the surface, a sense of desperation from Jody and a quiet resignation from Travis. She was clinging to him with every touch, every kiss, as though her body could bind him to her forever. But for Travis, the passion felt hollow, tainted by the emotional manipulation that followed every encounter. When it was over, they lay together in silence. Jody rested her head on his chest, tracing lazy circles on his skin with her fingertips. But Travis's thoughts were miles away. He stared at the ceiling, wondering how he had gotten here, trapped in a cycle of lust and guilt, unable to fully escape. "I love you," Travis, Jody whispered, her voice soft but filled with intensity. "I know you love me too. We're meant to be together. You just have to see it." Travis closed his eyes, his chest tightening at her words. He didn't love her, not anymore. He didn't want this life, this constant tug of war between desire and resentment. But every time he tried to pull away, she reeled him back in, using the only tool she had left, their physical connection. In the days that followed, Jody's obsession became more apparent. She started showing up unannounced at Travis's house, waiting for him in the parking lot after work, calling him incessantly. She needed to keep him close, to remind him of their physical bond, to keep the illusion of intimacy alive. But Travis, tired of the constant back and forth, began seeing other women. He wanted to move on, to find someone who wasn't wrapped up in the tangled mess of emotions and manipulation that defined his relationship with Jody. But every time he tried, Jody would find out. She'd confront him, crying, accusing him of betrayal, then seduce him once again, using their past to keep him trapped. Their relationship had devolved into a vicious cycle, one fueled by lust, jealousy, and a simmering anger that neither of them could escape. Every meeting became a whirlwind of heated kisses and harsh words. One moment, they were locked in a passionate embrace. The next, they were yelling, accusing, and blaming each other for the pain they both felt. One night, after another explosive argument, Jody stormed out of Travis's house, her eyes wild with anger. Travis was left standing in the doorway, his heart pounding, his mind racing. He couldn't do this anymore. He couldn't keep going back to her, couldn't keep getting sucked into the same toxic cycle. But deep down, he feared what would happen if he tried to leave for good. Jody was no longer just heartbroken, she was dangerous. The passion they had shared, the connection that had once brought them together, had turned into something dark and twisted. Travis knew it, but he didn't know how to break free. As he watched her drive away that night, a sense of dread settled over him. Jody wasn't going to let go. And no matter how many times he tried to end things, she would always find a way to pull him back. The downward spiral had begun, and there was no turning back. It was a scorching day in Mesa, Arizona, but the heat inside Travis Alexander's home was far more suffocating. The tension between him and Jody Arias had reached its breaking point, their volatile relationship spiraling toward its inevitable end. Travis had been clear with her he was done. He wanted to move on, to leave their toxic entanglement behind and start fresh. But Jody wasn't ready to let go. Jody's obsession with him had only deepened, even as Travis made it clear that the relationship had no future. The rejection stung her like 1,000 needles, and she couldn't imagine a world where she wasn't part of his life. In her mind, their connection was unbreakable, their bond forged in the heat of lust, love, and the turbulent energy that defined them. Desperate, Jody devised one last plan. She would go to Travis' house, seduce him, and remind him of the passion they shared. If she couldn't have him in life, she would ensure no one else would, either. In her twisted mind, love and destruction had become inextricably linked. Jody arrived at Travis' house without warning, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and dread. She knew this was her last chance, her final opportunity to win him back, or to take control of the situation in a way only she could. When Travis opened the door, his expression was guarded, a mixture of surprise and resignation. He had hoped he'd seen the last of her, but he couldn't deny the pull she still had over him. "I just came to talk," Jody said, her voice soft, her eyes pleading. "I miss you, Travis. We were so good together once. Can't we just talk?" Travis hesitated, then sighed and stepped aside, letting her in. Jody could feel the distance between them both physically and emotionally, but she wasn't deterred. She knew exactly how to break through that barrier. Inside, the air was thick with unspoken words, the unresolved tension between them heavy in the small space. Jody made her move, inching closer to him as she spoke, her voice low and sultry. She reached out, placing her hand on his arm, the familiar touch sending a jolt of electricity through both of them. "You don't have to say anything," Jody whispered, her lips brushing against his ear. "Just let me remind you of what we had." Travis stiffened but didn't pull away. The truth was, as much as he wanted to escape the toxic cycle they were caught in, he couldn't deny the raw, physical chemistry that had always drawn them back together. He knew it was wrong, but the attraction was still there, undeniable, irresistible. Jody pressed her body against his, her hands roaming across his chest, down to his waist, tugging at the hem of his shirt. Travis closed his eyes, a mixture of guilt and desire flooding through him. He should stop this. He should walk away. But when Jody's lips found his, all the reasons to resist melted away. Their kisses were feverish, desperate, as though they both knew this would be their last time together. Jody's hands moved frantically, pulling at his clothes, stripping him bare, and Travis responded in kind, losing himself in the moment. They stumbled into the bedroom, their bodies colliding with a force that was both passionate and dangerous. Every touch was laced with both desire and a dark undercurrent of finality. Jody's kisses were searing, her touch possessive, as if she were claiming him one last time. For Travis, it was a release, a brief escape from the reality of their twisted relationship, even as he knew deep down that this would be the end. The air was thick with sweat and lust as they fell onto the bed, their bodies entwined in a heated frenzy. The sheets twisted beneath them, their movements frantic and primal, as if they were trying to burn out every last ember of what they had shared. Jody was relentless, her touch aggressive yet seductive, her lips finding his again and again, pulling him deeper into the web she had spun. For a moment, it was just them, no more arguments, no more jealousy, just the physical connection that had always bound them together. But even in the heat of passion, Jody's mind was racing, her jealousy and obsession simmering just beneath the surface. As their feverish encounter drew to a close, Travis lay back, exhausted, his breathing heavy, his skin slick with sweat. Jody watched him for a moment, her eyes dark and unreadable. She could feel the shift in him. He was pulling away again, retreating into the same emotional distance that had driven her to this point. And that's when it clicked. He wasn't hers anymore. No matter how much she tried to seduce him, no matter how intense their physical connection had been, Travis was already gone. The realization hit her like a cold wave, washing away any remnants of reason. She had tried to win him back, but it hadn't worked, and now she had only one option left. Jody slipped out of bed quietly, her movements slow and deliberate. She reached into her bag, her fingers brushing against the cool metal of the knife she had hidden there. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her mind was clear now, cold, focused. This was the only way. Travis was still catching his breath, his eyes closed, oblivious to the storm brewing beside him. He didn't see Jody's hand slip under the covers. He didn't feel the shift in the air until it was too late. Jody stood over him now, her hand trembling slightly as she gripped the knife. Her breath was ragged, her mind swirling with the weight of what she was about to do. She had loved him, truly loved him, and now, in her twisted mind, this was the only way to keep him forever. She hesitated for a split second, but then the memory of his rejection, his distance flashed in her mind, and the rage returned. In one swift, violent motion, she brought the knife down, the blade slicing through the air with a sickening finality. Travis's eyes shot open, his body jerking in shock and pain. Blood splattered across the white sheets, staining them crimson. Jody didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Her mind was a whirlwind of fury, jealousy, and heartbreak, and in that moment, she was no longer the woman who had once loved Travis. She was something else entirely. The room was filled with the sounds of her rage, sharp gasps, the metallic sound of the blade cutting through flesh, the sickening thud of Travis's body hitting the floor. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. Jody stood there, panting, her hands slick with blood, her mind numb. Travis lay motionless at her feet, his once vibrant, charismatic presence reduced to a lifeless form. The realization of what she had done began to sink in, creeping up on her like a cold, dark shadow, but there was no turning back now. She had crossed a line that could never be undone. As she looked down at the man she had once loved, now lying in a pool of his own blood, Jody felt nothing but emptiness. The night was eerily quiet inside Travis Alexander's home. Outside, the Arizona desert was still and hot, but within the walls of his house, a storm was brewing, one that neither he nor Jody Arias could escape. It started like any other night. Jody was calm, her demeanor soft and controlled, but beneath her placid exterior, there was a brewing intensity. She had come here for one final encounter, one final moment to reclaim what she believed was hers. Travis was hers, he had always been hers, and tonight, she would make sure of it. The house was dimly lit as Jody slipped into the bathroom, watching as Travis stood under the stream of the shower. The water cascaded down his body, the steam filling the air, cloaking the room in a foggy haze. He was unaware, oblivious to the danger standing just behind him. Jody's mind raced with memories of their past, the passion, the lust, the desire. She could still feel his touch on her skin, the heat of his kisses, the way their bodies had fit together perfectly in moments of ecstasy. But now, those memories felt tainted, poisoned by the knowledge that he had moved on, that he was already letting her slip away. As she stood there watching him, her hand tightened around the knife she had brought with her. The blade gleamed in the low light, sharp and cold. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of fear and adrenaline surging through her veins. She didn't want to do this, not really, but in her mind, there was no other choice. If she couldn't have him, then no one else could. It happened in an instant, a flash of motion, the sound of the shower drowned out by the sudden gasp of pain that escaped from Travis's lips. Jody had plunged the knife into his back, the blade cutting deep into his flesh. Travis stumbled forward, slamming into the shower wall, his hands grasping at the tiles as blood began to pour from the wound. His mind reeled, trying to comprehend what was happening. But before he could turn to face her, Jody struck again. This time, the knife slashed across his side, cutting deep into his ribs. He screamed in agony, his voice bouncing off the walls of the small bathroom. Blood splattered across the white tiles, staining the water red as it swirled down the drain. "Jody, stop." Travis cried out, his voice raw with pain and shock. But Jody couldn't stop, not now. The rage inside her had taken over, the jealousy, the betrayal, all culminating in this moment. She felt powerful, in control for the first time in months. Her hand moved with precision, each stab a calculated strike meant to inflict maximum damage. Travis tried to fight back, his hands grasping at her, pushing her away, but he was weakening fast. His blood was everywhere on the floor, the walls, and Jody's hands, staining her with the evidence of her obsession. Jody's breathing was ragged, her heart pounding as she continued to stab him, over and over, the sound of the knife cutting through flesh filling the room. Travis's movements became sluggish, his body slumping against the shower wall as the life drained out of him. But it wasn't enough. Jody wanted to make sure she needed to be sure. With a final burst of energy, she reached for the gun she had hidden in her bag, pulling it out with shaking hands. Travis was barely conscious, his body slumped on the floor, his eyes glazed over with pain and shock. Jody's hands trembled as she aimed the gun at him, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The room was silent, except for the soft drip of blood hitting the floor, the only sound in the heavy, oppressive air. She pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the house, a deafening sound that seemed to shatter the silence. Travis's body jerked one last time, and then he was still. The bathroom was a scene of carnage, blood everywhere. The walls, the floor, the once pristine white tiles now painted in deep crimson. Travis lay motionless, his body a broken, lifeless shell. Jody stood there, staring down at him, her chest heaving with exertion. She was covered in his blood, her clothes soaked, her hands slick with the evidence of what she had done. For a moment, Jody didn't move. She couldn't. The reality of what she had just done hit her like a tidal wave, crashing over her with brutal force. Travis was dead. She had killed him. Panic set in. Her hands shook violently as she dropped the gun, her mind racing. She had to get out of there, had to clean up, had to erase any trace of what had just happened. But the blood, there was so much blood. Jody stumbled back, her feet slipping on the wet, slick floor. She looked around, frantically trying to figure out what to do next. The bathroom was a mess, and her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. How could she cover this up? How could she escape? She ran to the sink, splashing water on her face, scrubbing at her hands, trying to wash away the blood. But it wouldn't come off. It was everywhere, clinging to her skin like a reminder of what she had just done. She grabbed a towel, wiping down the surfaces, trying to clean up the mess, but it was futile. There was too much. She couldn't erase it all. In a frenzy, she threw her blood-soaked clothes into a plastic bag, grabbing her things and stumbling out of the bathroom. Her mind was in overdrive. She had to leave, had to get out before anyone saw her. Jody fled the house, her heart pounding in her chest as she drove away, her hands still shaking on the steering wheel. The night air felt suffocating, the weight of what she had done pressing down on her with every mile she put between herself and the scene of the crime. But no matter how far she drove, she couldn't escape the truth. In those final moments, the fiery passion that had once consumed them had turned into something far darker. Their last touch, their final embrace, was not one of love or lust, but of death. Jody had ended it in the most violent, brutal way imaginable. The passion they had shared was gone now, replaced by blood and horror. And as Jody sped away into the night, leaving behind the man she had once claimed to love, she knew there was no going back. This was the end of everything. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, the air thick with anticipation and morbid curiosity. Reporters clutched their notebooks, the gallery a sea of eager faces waiting to hear the salacious details that had turned this trial into a national spectacle. At the center of it all sat Jody Arias, her once flawless beauty now hardened by the weight of her crimes. She looked calm, almost too calm. As the jury filed in, their faces a mixture of disbelief and disgust. It had been 5 years since Travis Alexander's brutal murder, and now, in 2013, the truth was finally unfolding for the world to see. The trial was no longer just about the facts of the murder. It had become a study of obsession, jealousy, and the dark corners of desire that had led to Travis's violent death. Every detail of their relationship, every kiss, every touch, every moment of intimacy was now being laid bare for the world to dissect. The prosecution wasted no time painting a vivid picture of Jody's obsessive nature. Prosecutor Juan Martinez stood before the jury, his voice steady, but his words sharp like a blade cutting through the fabric of Jody's carefully constructed lies. "Ladies and gentlemen, this was not self-defense," Martinez began. "This was a crime of passion, a crime rooted in jealousy, control, and manipulation. Travis Alexander wanted to move on with his life, but Jody Arias couldn't let that happen. And when she couldn't have him, she chose to end his life in the most brutal way imaginable." The jurors leaned in, eyes wide, as Martinez recounted the details of the murder: 27 stab wounds, a slit throat, a gunshot to the head. The sheer brutality of the act stunned the courtroom into silence. One by one, the prosecution laid out their evidence. The camera recovered from the scene became a pivotal part of the case, despite Jody's efforts to destroy it. The memory card still held chilling images, photos taken just before the murder. There they were, Jody and Travis, entangled in their final moments of passion, naked and vulnerable. The camera had captured everything: the lust, the desire, the physical connection that had defined their relationship. But it wasn't just the photos. The autopsy revealed the extent of Travis's injuries: multiple stab wounds to the heart, defensive cuts on his hands, a deep slash across his throat, and finally, a gunshot wound to his head. It was overkill, the kind of violence driven by uncontrollable rage and jealousy. As each piece of evidence was presented, flashbacks played in the minds of those in the courtroom: Jody and Travis in their private moments of passion, their relationship intense and chaotic. The same hands that had once caressed Travis's body now held the knife that ended his life. Martinez continued, his voice rising with intensity. This was not a crime of self-defense. This was premeditated murder. Jody Arias planned this. She stalked Travis, manipulated him, and when she realized she couldn't control him anymore, she decided that if she couldn't have him, no one else would. Jody's defense team, led by Kirk Nurmi, tried to spin a different narrative. They argued that Jody had been a victim of Travis's emotional abuse, that she had acted in self-defense after years of manipulation and mistreatment, but the jury wasn't buying it. In a shocking moment, Jody herself took the stand, recounting their relationship in graphic detail. She spoke about their sexual escapades, painting a picture of herself as a woman trapped by Travis's desires. Her testimony was filled with descriptions of their secret life: the phone calls, the erotic photos, the forbidden encounters, but instead of garnering sympathy, her words seemed to expose the truth. Jody had been obsessed, unable to let go, driven by a need to possess Travis completely. "I didn't want to kill him," she said, her voice trembling with forced emotion. "But he wouldn't stop. He kept coming after me." As the trial reached its climax, the jury was faced with a narrative that went beyond murder. It was about control, lust, and the dangerous consequences of obsession. The courtroom was riveted as the prosecution played phone calls between Jody and Travis, their voices filled with flirtation, sexual innuendos, and promises of secret meetings. The passion they once shared had been twisted into something dark, something that led to murder. In one of the trial's most chilling moments, Martinez asked the jury to imagine the last moments of Travis's life: his fear, his pain, as he realized the woman he had once shared his deepest desires with was now taking his life. "Imagine the terror," Martinez said, his voice low but powerful. "Imagine knowing that the person who once kissed you is now holding a knife to your throat." The jury deliberated for days, but when they returned, their decision was clear. Jody Arias was guilty of first-degree murder. There was no doubt in their minds this was premeditated, a brutal act of revenge masked by a toxic, obsessive love. The courtroom erupted as the verdict was read, Travis's family weeping with relief, while Jody sat expressionless, her fate sealed. The sentencing phase was equally dramatic. The prosecution pushed for the death penalty, arguing that Jody's crime was heinous enough to warrant the ultimate punishment. But in the end, she was spared death. Instead, Jody Arias was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the trial concluded, the story of Jody and Travis, their lust, their lies, their love-hate relationship came to a final, devastating close. What had started as a whirlwind romance had spiraled into an obsession that ended in murder. The passion they once shared had turned deadly, leaving behind only pain and destruction. In the final moments, Jody was led away in handcuffs, the courtroom emptying out as the media swarmed outside, eager for the next chapter in this tragic tale. But for Travis, there would be no more chapters. His life had been taken by the woman who had claimed to love him. Jody Arias had wanted to possess him completely, and in the end, she had done just that.